What is the best example of a real-life butterfly effect that you have experienced or heard of? My sister's muffler fell off her car on the way to a family function. It wasn't a big deal, but it meant that she could no longer lend it to my mom later that week as it would be in the shop for repairs. My mom had already been told she could use the car and had already made a doctor's appointment. My uncle volunteered to drive her instead. This minor change in plans altered when my uncle and aunt would be able to leave the city by a few hours. They were supposed to go to their farm, but instead my aunt waited at her mother's while my uncle was dropping mom off. My aunt's mother had a heart attack and would have been completely alone that afternoon if not for my sister's car trouble. Because my aunt was there, she was able to call the paramedics and they were able to save her. A close friend smoked 2 packs a day. Every day, he'd walk to the 7-Eleven, buy a couple packs, and walk home. He wouldn't buy cartons for some reason. Liked to change his brand occasionally, I guess. Eventually he decides to quit smoking. Has a tough time of it. Tells the guys at the 7-Eleven he wants to stop smoking and they tell him good luck and encourage him. They encourage him so much they refuse to sell cigarettes to him when he has a moment of weakness. He freaks out, heads back across the street in anger without waiting for the light, gets clipped by a motorcycle speeding through the intersection. Motorcycle crashes, rider is tossed, ambulances come, both head to same hospital. Turns out motorcycle is ridden by a guy who runs his own construction business. Feels pretty bad about it. Talks to my friend about his business. My friend hangs drywall, but doesn't like his boss. Eventually rider hires friend at a higher salary. Friend does good job for a bit. 2 years later friend is doing very well. Promoted numerous times, now has a team of guys working for him. Gets a phone call. Boss was in a motorcycle accident, in hospital. Friend rushes there directly. Boss ends up being paralyzed. Has some brain damage from a concussion that slows his speech. Within a few weeks boss has friend running the business for him. Friend is doing great. Business is doing great. Boss decides to sell the business to my friend. He decides to take it over and buy it. Friend now owns construction business and has grown it a lot. A few years later my friend gets an offer to sell the company to a larger company. Takes the money. My friend is 42 years old and retired, worth over $10 million now. All because he quit smoking. Well, and because he worked his ass off when the opportunity arose. But still, if he hadn't decided to quit smoking, who knows? I should get hit by more cars. I played World of Warcraft. More specifically, I was obsessed with World of Warcraft. Way back when. I wanted the original collector's edition, and it was coming out on my birthday. A series of mix-ups occurred. My mom really wanted to get it for my birthday, but she ordered the standard edition instead of the collector's edition. This was a huge deal to me, so we got it fixed, but it delayed the shipment. So instead of getting the game on the day of release, it was scheduled to be days late. I had originally intended to take the entire week off work. I was 16, working full time at the time, but I didn't, since I wasn't gonna have the game for ages. So at 11 AM on that fateful Thursday, I'm packing my backpack and I'm walking out the door to get to my noon shift. Meanwhile, 2,100 miles away in Texas, some dude I don't know has just created a night elf and decided that the night elf starting area is BS, which is totally true. So he starts the massive, epic walk all the way from the night elf starting area to the human starting area. So I step out the door, and I walk face first into the UPS guy. Turns out, my game has arrived 3 business days early, literally at the last possible moment. I freak. I rush back into the house, start the install, and frantically start calling co-workers. Can someone pick this shift up? Yes, they can. I log in, make the human paladin. I still play this dude, and start killing bandits. Some dude I don't know does a yell to the zone that he's starting an awesome new guild. I join it. A night elf who just finished his massive trek across the entire world also joins it. This guild lasts exactly 17 minutes before the guild leader says something dumb and we all tell him to frick off. During that 17-minute window, when I was supposed to be at work, playing a game that wasn't even supposed to have arrived for a week, I meet Alex the night elf. 3 years later, Alex needs a roommate and can't find one, and I desperately want to leave Vermont. We both say frick it, and I move to Texas. I go to school. I make friends. I get jobs. I date girls. The last 10 years of my life would be totally freaking different if some random butthole hadn't made a single yell at a time when I shouldn't have even been logged in. And if a dude had been 10 minutes slower crossing 2 continents to level in his favorite leveling zone. The best example is JFK. 1. Born with one leg slightly shorter than the other, leading to his famously unstable back. 2. Football injury in college exacerbates back problems. 3. Injury during PT 109 incident in World War II further worsens back. 4. Fast forward to Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The first shot that hit Kennedy in the back and exited his neck was survivable. He could have easily ducked out of the way after, but his back brace kept him upright, leaving his head completely exposed. JFK could have been saved had his one dang leg been the same size as the other. My grandpa went off adventuring as a young man with some of his pals, a buddy who boxed and a buddy who played guitar. My grandpa didn't have any special skill like that, so he washed dishes. These 3 guys just ambled across America, boxing, strumming and scrubbing for enough cash to make it to the next town. After a while the adventures tapered off and the other 2 fellas made their way back to their corners of the world. But my grandpa couldn't scrounge up the money to get back to Illinois, so he kept washing dishes for quite some time, hoping for a lucky break. That break came in the form of a wallet he found lying on the sidewalk with enough cash for a bus ticket back home. He wasted no time. He met my grandma back in Illinois, settled down, started a family, and as a result, I exist. Sometimes I think about that man that lost his wallet, and how mad he must have been when he realized I owe him my life. On Monday, the 10th of September, 2001, my father received a call to let him know his job interview for tomorrow had to be postponed until that Thursday, because his would-be employer had overbooked his schedule. My father was not in the World Trade Center when it went down. I had a friend who overslept so missed the bus that was bombed in London. I had plans with my girlfriend for Saturday night a couple months back. I received a last-minute call from my close buddy, inviting me to drive an hour and a half north of where I live to her party. I called my girlfriend, explained the situation. She said go ahead and have fun, I'm just filling out online job applications anyway. I'll just finish doing this. We can just see each other tomorrow on Sunday. I was so happy and relieved. I promised her a great night and had a couple gifts to give her as well. Things were going so good with this girl. As the night progressed, BTW, the party was freaking amazing. I text her and ask her how things are going. She said that her friend was trying to drag her out. I encouraged her to go out, so she did. I text her a couple hours later, no response. I call her, no answer. The next day, I call her a couple times, no answer. I text her, no response. She completely flaked on our date with no explanation. I find out a couple days later that she is in a relationship with a guy she had met that night when her friend dragged her out, and I encouraged her. They are now engaged. I have the love of my life because of my 8th grade math teacher's bad judgment. In 8th grade, I was doing unusually well at algebra, so well that my teacher decided to recommend me for freshman year honors algebra. I was surprised because math had never been an interest or a strong suit. I was much better at my English classes. Anyway, during that ill-fated, 1 semester long attempt at honors algebra, I met a guy, let's call him Nathan, who invited me to be part of his homecoming group. As I knew nobody at the school, one of the girls in that homecoming group, we'll call her Linda, had a slightly younger sister, we'll call her Anna, who tagged along for the drop-off at the meetup spot. I only caught a glimpse of Anna, but it burned into my mind. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen, but I didn't get to talk to her. Weeks later I got an invite to Linda's birthday party, piggybacking on Nathan's invite, as he was friends with that group already. At that party, I became friends with Anna, and I was in love with her for years before I did something about it. We're getting married in March. If that math teacher hadn't had the terrible judgment to put me in a class I had no business being in, I would never have met anyone in that group, including my future wife. In 9th century England, a mom got a book of poetry and told her kids that whoever learned to read it and memorized all the poems first could have the book. One of her sons wins the book. He grows up to be Alfred the Great, King of England. around the year 880, decided he wanted every young man in England to be able to read books in English, too, but there weren't many books in English. He had a bunch of books translated into English and translated a few himself, and had copies sent out to all the monasteries so they could teach people to read. The monks taught people to read in English. The people taught other people to read in English. Now here we all are on Reddit. From personal experience, I got my ass kicked by a guy named Wolverine in Michigan, and 9 years later my band is touring Australia because of it. When I was 14, I tried wrestling in high school. I was pretty big, so I was in the 189 weight class and it sucked. I had to wrestle all the seniors and my first and only matchup came against this guy named Wolverine. Never got his real name. Anyway, I quit wrestling and next year it was either wrestle again or join the school musical. Since I didn't want to deal with wrestling again, I went with the musical and scored the lead role. Next year I got the lead again and a friend of mine told me how he's doing this 5-week program in this music school in Boston called Berkeley. I checked it out and went there myself that year for 5 weeks and fell in love with Boston. The moment I graduated I moved from Detroit to Boston and started up my band. We started playing for a few years, got by gigs and built up. Then this Australian radio program found us through Twitter and started playing us. Things snowballed from there and now come December we will be leaving there to play some venues and even some festivals for a couple of months. So thank you, Wolverine, for making this all happen. I owe you one. History in general is one big, confusing butterfly effect. Even events that have no obvious connections do. I'll give an example. 9/11 wouldn't have happened if Queen Victoria hadn't been born with a mutation on one of her X chromosomes. It sounds crazy, but hear me out. 1. Queen Victoria was born with a mutation that made her a carrier of the blood disorder hemophilia. It was likely a spontaneous mutation, as there is no evidence of it in her maternal line until her birth. 2. Victoria passes the mutation on to 3 of her 9 children, and from there on to numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She passes it to her daughter, Alice, who passes it to her own daughter, Alexandra. Alexandra marries Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and passes the faulty gene on to their only son, Alexei. 3. The family becomes reclusive as a result of their son's illness. Alexandra forms a close bond with the mad monk, Rasputin, because he seems to be able to manage Alexei's bleeding. The royal family is already unpopular with the Russian public due to Nicholas being a crappy ruler and being too dependent on his equally crappy advisors. Their reclusiveness is interpreted as indifference towards the Russian people, and their association with Rasputin is seen as general insanity. Although there was a lot of animosity towards them, these things are the straw that breaks the camel's back. Rasputin is murdered by minor members of the Russian nobility, and soon after the Russian Revolution starts. 4. Nicholas and his entire family are murdered by revolutionaries. The USSR is born, and becomes one of the world's superpowers. 5. The USSR invades Afghanistan in the late 1970s. This leads to all kinds of trouble, and their eventual retreat leads to the Afghan Civil War. 6. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda both come out of the Russian occupation of Afghanistan and the subsequent civil war. 7. Al-Qaeda plots the 9/11 attacks under the protection of the Taliban and carry them out. Is it convoluted? Yes, but there is a connection. Without the USSR, there would be no Al-Qaeda, and Queen Victoria's genetic disorder played a huge role in the formation of the USSR. That's just an example. History is full of absurd crap like this. I decide to use skip school one day, which my mom allowed. My aunt we hadn't seen in years decides to visit that day. We take an impromptu trip to her house, where my aunt talks my mom into moving up there. This event leads to my sister meeting her husband and having 2 kids, my other sister getting assaulted and having a kid, my mom meeting my stepfather, having a child at 40, and nearly getting murdered by said husband. All of these major life-changing events can all be traced back to me skipping school. Some guy didn't get into art school so he attempted genocide. Adolf Hitler failed in his initial attempts to become an artist. One thing led to another and the United States dropped 2 atomic weapons on the sovereign nation of Japan. The Buffalo Bills sucking in 1968 created the Kardashians. If they didn't suck they wouldn't have drafted O.J. Simpson early. That caused him to move to Buffalo and meet and allegedly kill his wife. Kim Kardashian's dad was famous for being one of his lawyers, which made her just relevant enough for her tape to get noticed, resulting in the Kardashians we have today. Online dating back in 2012. A random girl with no picture and a very short bio looked at my OkCupid profile, but didn't message me. I never message somebody with no picture. What are the chances you are attracted to them? And on top of that, we had a 37% match rating. On a whim, I sent her a one-liner, tied the knot in 2014 and very happily married. That 10-second message fundamentally altered my life's path, including what continent I'd spend the rest of my life on, Europe versus the US. The biggest example of this is history must be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, one murder that led to a world war, and that war fueled the fire for what would be the Second World War, which then again helped lead to the Cold War. Although at that time in history, basically every European nation was simply waiting for a good reason to go to war with someone else. And the alliance systems mean that as soon as anyone decided to go to war, the rest of Europe would become involved. If it wasn't for Ferdinand, there'd be something else who ignited the fire not long afterwards. My ex's poor choice of words on a text message enraged me. Coincidentally, in those 10 minutes of rage, I was asked if I wanted to do a student exchange. I said yes. They asked where. I said the furthest you can send me. I spent the best 6 months of my life abroad. I came back home, small town, and my insight was different. Everything changed completely, and I think of going back someday, just cause I got mad. I applied for a job on a whim. I didn't really think I was qualified for it, and it was over 200 miles from home, so I didn't expect to take the job even if it was offered. Well, the interview went better than expected and I could not turn down the salary. Through a Facebook post, I reconnected with a high school friend who had a house with his fiancée. Cue me moving over. I introduced my new roommates, we'll call them Don and Jamie, to a couple, Dan and Janelle, I knew through another mutual friend. Long story short, Dan is in the process of divorcing his wife Janelle. Jamie kicked Don out and Dan is now living here with Jamie, all because I applied for a job. A few years ago, I was working at Taco Bell when the power went out. After an hour with no electricity, boss decides we can all go home early. It's still pretty early, so my friend and I decide to go for a walk together, where we talk about guys and other girl things. I mention really wanting to meet a guy who listens to my favorite band. They weren't very known at the time. The next day I'm back at work when this dude comes in with his mom and sisters, wearing said band shirt. Internally freaking out, I take their order and pretty much ambush him as they're leaving. This is very unlike me. I've never approached anyone first, but I remember what I said the day before and it gives me courage. I write down my contact info for him and we talk, quickly realizing we're like the same person. It turns out he and his family live several states away and just happened to stop at that Bell on a day I was working. Fast forward to now, we've lived together for over a year and have a dog. You have been visited by the money cat, like for good luck and fortune. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.